Any
so that you go smoothly. 45, 46, okay.
That's why. Stand out. Good check and out. Looks at. That's a thing. That's good.
Okay, guys, we'll go ahead and get started.
Any tangazo. Gunda the current lamna constant choco nombi. Seriton tatu kundizea thing on the mandroala. The Tiring Zakatik the Tago Josum Zeatina Larry in our Kasakin at the title Chingdosarity, check out Rosaritatim and enjoy.
So today we're going to be continuing this class, which is on this book, which is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's book called Science and Philosophy in Indian Buddhist Classics. And in this book, we're in chapter 23. We're talking about the view, meditation, and conduct. And we've already done one class on this, so we're continuing this topic. We'll be going on and continuing talking about meditation.
Last Tani Kirdani Nachu when he shenada, Naso Kirdani Roa Misita say Naso, Soso Mitsi the Yari Tanjava Yari Tawala, Takaleja go raise in Hilapchat at Samalio dero. What ten Najanan, ten Najas Ayoma, Teta Tes Manda and the Chile Nachu, Lapchala, Tangaso Matse Yarita de Kikushol in Java Tawala. Nalo Sauli get you tango raise at the mato, Tachalo Kaliga Goritish Rashio Mari.
So really, we all work really hard to improve our lives and to have a better life, and all different kinds of belief systems and philosophies really talk about, this idea that we can work hard and improve our lives. But what makes Buddhism unique is really important in Buddhism is that we're talking about improving our internal mind to improve our lives. We're not talking about improving our external conditions necessarily.
That's what Kitani Rengato Takangin Rochik Mitama someday Yoritang, Natsol Dikin Rawa Yapo Mea Tangaso Panjur Tanto Tata Chijego Marisiana, Rawan Raw, Tenji Yapo Maris, Tenji Naso Kangi. Leb divarite so jechuji te to na tanga so deki yongre samni sama sam de yor ina ya kinso na tenji ta di mi mambo tenji konsan chokya tenji songundu ya panjo yapo cheke yapo yo ni to so zeni ha ko ndu sita chalo ko panjo yapo cheke yo na ta da deki kanda me at sonza chamnyang je la so pinan sem gun wa ta ya la gapo cheni tenji na ma chongu zeni tenji songudu.
So generally what we think is that if we have lots of money, if we have lots of freedom, if we have, an easy life, then we will be happy. But we can, His Holiness often brings up this example that there are many people that have lots of wealth and are not happy. And so this is a way of understanding that it's not the external conditions, it's the mind that we're trying to change. So that's what determines our happiness and peace in this life.
Last was on that. Daily dot and Nachu Monichena, Nangal Sem Glapchat she de Yore, Natso Chadani, Chaloni, Galeta Legiore, Natso Kali Mombochi de word, the two thing Narutso Nanga Samla Tanta Manchini, non is also Kangi Chenita, Kangi Mombochi Natsolinian de Yore Sons and Nanga Sem Yavatantuna, de Kyungres in Chinion, Yonda Youngres, and Asu. So if
you look at our situation in this life, it is certain that we'll have external problems. There will definitely be conditions and things that externally come to harm us, right? So that's definite. So the important thing really is that what can we change? Well, we can change our mind. And so by changing our mind, then we're able to really improve our lives.
Pamjo Hachan Yabocha Tani, Shawan, Pechimbo Yovat, Rawan, Charles the Kitchen, Masuta Tochini, Roamil Rawan, Bachelok King Natso Diki Yon, Rawan, the Panjo Tazo, that Hen Toando, Chindoa Michik Tiligon, Le Pache, Zomato and Road, and Jiggin Sam Lady or Tanda Mimombo, Gangincho, Pena, Asia, Nandrochin, and Japan Rawata, Korean Rawata, Taiwan Rawata, Tesola, Rawan Yabondula, Pancho Chimundua. Inayon Japan Rawatan Korea to so ranso chenye ta haja mo bo yung go resing.
So if we look at both Western and Eastern countries, you can see there's many examples of countries that have great wealth, that have great power, where the people have a lot of individual freedom. And so if external conditions were what made people happy, then you would expect everyone in these countries to be happy. But the reality is you can look at Asian countries like Korea, Japan,
Taiwan,
all of these countries, right? And they have lots of wealth. The citizens generally have lots of freedom, but they also have incredibly high rates of suicide. People in those countries and in the U.S., there's very high rates of suicide.
Sonza, Tangatsoni, Chloko Chinchang, Gatsol, Deketsi Gona, Parchetan, Minjikan, Roa Mitop Tangonichina, Teli Yaji Tangona, Yaji Yat, Soli Yaji Chitangona, Parcheche Togmari. Tinaja Panjo Kachina. Te Matua the God dosity, Miss Samlo Titor, Samlon Javandro, Samlo and Dopache, Samlon Mandra Conditini, Teli Centuri Tanto Omar, Nano Savlo Seching Tori Tantomna. Nichanani charging dinner.
The Belgian thing, the Hila Gangla did sit.
Nalo Salon Java Tomato, Teli, Choloni, Patrim that so Teli Centuri Tanto cover.
So, if we don't actually change the way that we think, then however much, even though we're improving these external conditions, it's not actually going to help us be any happier, really. So the important thing is that we continue to work on and change our mind, the way that we're thinking. This is what will actually bring us happy.
Sonza, non savlo tawala, now Jagan the Gom Jab Gore, Labde Gore, Gom Jab Zediat, now Janija, now Kigum Danjogo Mila. Tan Nachu Savlo Tansa Lapcha Mombuchi, your Patel, Yan, the Savlo Tani, so Savlo Java. So
in the three of these, the view, meditation, and conduct, when we talk about meditation, there's two types of meditation that we talk about. We talk about what we could call placement meditation or concentration, single-pointed meditation, and then we have analytical meditation. And both of these meditations you can understand as this idea that you're taking an object over and over and over again.
Sonza, Tel Tenita, Gomjab Gore Zidinima, and the concern Chocodina Mupatel, Karjish and Mapatati, my Jachimbuchina Mupatashu, or Ketan, Nambijon Mambo, Laura Chimbotason, Animal Leonre, Tela Capi Mupakapa, Navjan Mupan, Kipi Mupa, Yomonam, Young Mupas, and Mupajan, Monzachendu.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about the types of objects that one can meditate on. And so there's different ways we can break down these objects, the objects of meditation. There's also different ways to break this down, but here in this book, we're going to break it down into 4 general classes of objects of meditation. One is universal objects of meditation for purifying your behavior, objects of meditation for expertise, and objects of meditation for purifying afflictions.
Tomba Capi Mubate and Lauren Chimota, Constant Chocondil Tima Jetachik Danjana Mato Telendesha Namandu, Yanaya, Capi Mubala, Lauren Chimotason, Yampaya, Jetamba Jandu, and Namto Mepizin, the Namto Chipizin and Dani, Amupuntata Gubayon Trapazini, Teleampa Jetchendu.
So we're going to be really teaching from the Lamrim Chimmo here. His Holiness in this book doesn't go into great detail about the objects of meditation. So just so you know, we're looking at the Lamrim Chimmo. And so if we look at universal objects of meditation, the Tibetan there's Kepe Mikpa. So it's like sort of objects of meditation that are always applicable or are applicable for anyone is one way to understand that. And so we can break this down into 4. There's discursive images or images with some sort of conceptual content, non-discursive images, so just the image. These will be sort of jargony terms, but the limits of existence and achievements of your purpose. So we'll explain what those mean.
Also, Tatombo, Naptome Pimunia Zinia Zenakar Laudita, Matsunabi Gom Jampi, Yontraka Gom de Gom Te Javicapso, Mupatas, Naptome Pizinia Lamugores, Naptomupi Zinia Zenakar Laude, so with same La Mupa Chita. Tembo, which you train it, telling get your Sawan in Majani Gom Java to tend the attendee, Yankase Rimbo de Toa de Gores, Tendi Lola share the Atala, Zinia Lab de or Pasha put Umupo money to my imba, so Shariatala, Mupaja Cosatel, and not from Epizi. Tika Lakepan Ramadache Mesonsa, not Tome.
So the first one, which is we would say non-discursive image is kind of probably what most people think of as meditation, or as the most famous type of meditation. It's this idea that you have an image and you're not thinking about the image. The image is just appearing, and it's appearing to you. And it's important to understand that you're not looking at a physical object. This has to be a mental image, not an external image in the Tibetan system. It has to be a mental image that's appearing to you, and you keep your mind pointed on it singly, and there's no discursive thoughts about the image.
Also, tati gomgo korte kasa kini nga tsunza dalia chik juari da tayang teri mambo leo tsota kese yangyo nyonyo chijina tangaso tsama gomja ala gabo yungore tomatal gomjam na kare yungu yore ziti gomde yakpo jumpa yena parishi jani zea chik tobya yore jani zea da tobona ani lita sem tamal gomja kase jamna kali kyuni meago lisem dewa shibuchi toba yo sonsa te tsawa chimo tsori leka kare chunyamne che kona karina lisem na kange mena che boyung gro o sonsa gomjawa go chunjin ra oti tere.
So just to back up a minute, when we talk about meditation, what in this kind of this sort of placement meditation in particular, what is really the purpose of this? Well, one of the things is that if you practice single-pointed meditation, you can achieve what is called shine in Tibetan, shamatha. It's this calm abiding. It's this state of very advanced concentration. And when you achieve this state of concentration, then you're able to leave your mind on whatever object you have for essentially as long as you want. And so that's very useful when you're doing practices. And it also, you have what's sort of called pliancy of mind and body, but it basically just means that your body and mind are both able to do this kind of work without pain, that you have a very pleasant sensation that allows you to continue to meditate.
Also, tani kirdani gom jaftang ngoni tanga tso gunzda jeni liare wall jani gyachim concentre ko tele shole mombo chi yo la sani jimal nga ya te lo ka se zndro thumna te samgu ina tanga ya mombo je de yo la tandare nga tso gom jawi kaul ye chesho chi te gom ze at sem ge jaw gore man ko wanshi nga le tsawa ni chuto che chu ayo mar te gom re ayo mar makashi ron mon ro nyembo ni ne lo de no ke gom jaw te gom jaw yo mar ron mon nyeng ge yor ro ron mo am chong na ta ching kashi chet chu ka ta mi mon bo yo sa te son ro ni gom jaw do te yak po yo mar kar ji chu ra chu jap tin chi ta te ni yang na mi mon bo ke jap sa te le gom jaw do te yak po tsawa ni yo mar gom ze dia to wan shi te chol go ka se jap to an chi sum bo ka se na te yak re ma to te so ndge yo mar
So we've gone in previous classes, we've gone over quite a lot of detail about sort of meditation in general. So we're going to just give right now a little bit of a summary of some of this. But to continue this, one of the important things about meditation that is that meditation is something that you do with your mental consciousness. So in Buddhism we have sense consciousnesses and mental consciousnesses. So it's a mental image, right? So you're not, for example, it's really important to understand. Some people like to say they listen to music and meditate, right? And this is not meditation correctly. Some people sit there and listen to the water or crowds and think of that as meditation, but because that is a sensory consciousness, that is not meditation as we understand it. So the important thing is that meditation is done with your mental consciousness.
Also, now so gom japti go chlok ko da chesho te dai yin se ndo da ta da zene che go so da chesho te dai zene go so
da chesho te dai yin ke ta na ka
parche che ya ninga chasho te da da ma cha de
in the kare ke ta na ka shi da ke did you
da chesho te dai
I mean, da chesho te ja the loudest sound is the sound, but what does he mean? What's the point?
Biggest enemy is the sound.
Oh, the biggest enemy is the sound.
Oh, te la de go so that te jara mata sa shi
so that when meditating, the biggest enemy is the sounds.
La so that ni so kasambo tanjil de ni gom jawi kabla nga so che karaze gore chonji tan damba che gore duri ja yo mare ze nam je te la te karaze gore so garna da chorna ngani gomja ta keshem boris karse garna chorna men change chin atsi jab dena parshi gom de so kange che yong reze pe matach sonta nabje na chuna la chonji ta duri ze ni te chabar che chu che bi ka so chonji che gore ma to duri che yo mares.
So there's sort of a saying in talking about meditation in that we should use joyous effort, but we shouldn't be like pushing ourselves or forcing ourselves, right? So when we meditate, there's the Tibetan word sunju has this sense of joyous effort, has this idea of delighting in virtue. So when we meditate, it should be something that we do relaxed and easy and that we're enjoying, right? We shouldn't be sort of pushing ourselves or forcing ourselves, right? Because if you do that, it's not helpful.
아니 가상아 송어 트치아나 제자치니 뭐 트치잖아 그것도 니스포던들이 기천천이 롤로치니 zikpo lolo kase yinchi gyawlo to soya chamo chin deneni soso gandi mansam parutal dorje carbon ra ta ina dorje carbon mas na kartin rawo work karaw jing chi ri rawo chi tandi chi tiyo samba chineni te kambal semzini te gerimbo de kase to te tagare te tombo te de on di koro kartin ra chi sharo koro mcheni kalete te te baso che dana parshingoni soso tawa kartin rawo chi Ririchi Yohan Sharon, Nigede Gedenga Papa, Comdicina Parshita, series so Kati, so Mupata series Yungo. Teni Mupasa Boya Poncharsona, Mupatal Teni, Dramandra Sound Savani Matani, Jean Sound Jani, Teni Gentoni Degor. Tanjika said de Donate Gomjab Zeni, love Degor. At the Sound Lotan out of Page Javare Mato, Tindramandra Sanji Kalugom Kendro, that's also Carretoi on the court.
So as we talked about in previous classes, the general idea is when you meditate, you want to sit. You put your hands in this sort of mudra or this arrangement here. It's important to have your back straight and your eyes down a little bit. And the meditation that we talked about in the previous class is imagining that you have a very small vajra or dorje, which is one of the hand implements that we use in Tibetan Buddhism. But you also can just imagine like a small bright white, like a really bright white sort of seed thing right there. It doesn't have to be a dorje or a vajra. And this is actually just an example. We're using this as an example for concentration. But the idea is at first, right, even to get that to appear is very difficult. And you just slowly, without pushing, you slowly accustom yourself to that over lots of time. And then eventually, you're able to have the clear appearance of that object or whatever object of meditation without forcing, without pushing. And then, once you're able to do that and your mind is not going all over the place and you have the clear appearance, and then that's really when your meditation is working.
So that the Savlo the Parish Mupan the Chonju Ratsati, Tiniti Galasha, that's a date over it. So Savlo Taki on the Savlo and Ramanda, Kila Savlo, UK Savlo, Savlo Chalogic Jawar. Telenachuganani go Pazenia, Satan Jani Gombala, Parche Cheshik the Chaloka in a Savlo Shondra, the Tombo. Gomgoli Javi Kablet Shimbo Yungan, Tezaka Shalosha, and it tells us that in Yan Pajix on a Yanti Savlo Telesha, Telesha, Drogo Chigre, go Pare, Pache Chimbo chicken.
So when you first start, the biggest obstacle is what we would call excitement, or sometimes I think people call it scattering. And it's the idea that, so we're just using the same example of imagining like a bright white seed or a vajra, dorje here. As soon as you try to place your mind on that, your mind goes somewhere else, right? You lose the image or you start thinking about something else and you put it back and it goes somewhere else. And this is, of course, in the beginning, this is very strong and it's very difficult. And so we call this excitement. This is the fault of excitement.
Tani Mupatel Janita de Parishi Gentoni Teza Kamanga Chu Tenji Papa de Toni Tenji Younger Yapondo Deto. Tenji Yapo de Toyon Kavlion. Parchechi Karlegrezani, Mupatel Semba de Alama, Nyoto, Rochi Chani, Gomja, Soso Ta Gomja Yosa, Mupati on train de Gorita, Semba Manyoto Charge, Tela Jima Lauri. Tete Parchechi Buchit, Tenicha Gomja because Manyoto Chani de Ayomars, Ma Sambo, Chini, Rupaya Sambo Chini, Matoyan, Tinyoto Tigon Les on a Parchikipon Rochioni, Tingo Lanto, Tijani Moni Savani in Jumatoni, Parchechim Buchi Rezendo.
So the next obstacle that can arise is, so say you've sort of tamed the scattering or the excitement a little bit, so you're able to keep your on the object of focus for 5 or 10 minutes, something like that. So the next problem that arises is that while you're maintaining that focus, we call it dullness. There's sort of a sinking, a tiredness. The object will become less clear. And so that's really important to recognize this, because it can also be very pleasant to sit in this sort of dull feeling, which is actually a very big problem. So you always want to make sure to recognize this dullness and make your mind clear again.
Hola so. Otri chinita, choso gum jab thona, tani chini gum jab gore. Ta te mato parche tani rajure, tani gum jab de parshi, sem lolo cha, tene zupo lolo cha, lisem nika lolo cha neni. Kyo nyama chi nyama ni nyama samlo gum jab do na kali kyo ni mea chi cha yore, til jani top zeni na chungoni te sheri. Parshi, tele tini semba ke pocha, semba ke poti ni pala tini luyan. Kalimea chani ani nyama chi ni 100 200 300 kaze gom jamna kalimea chi chayo re jani parche to bar
Oh. Yeah, so if you're able to really do this repeatedly, if you can practice this object and you can do it without forcing, without having sort of what would we say, difficulty in your body or your mind, if you're able to do this in a relaxed fashion, but keep doing it every day, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, over and over again, then hopefully someday you would actually be able to achieve this state of shamatha.
Ani ta ngus tindi gom jab de nyelior kang kensan raw tindi yung gundu zegundu te lamram ta so na le tin thomas ndi parche tresi vil gom jab de nyi sa tin samba tambo ke gom jab kabla gom jab ni tindi mu pa tembo ya po jato gundu la che ni sam tindi gom jab de na kali choni mundu la ta che ni sam gom jab to pare nyama mombo gom jab ku jak parshil ma tiso to thorin ro Chikso mato gom jamato. Parishita maton. Parishikama chonga tsuri mato deto munduzi. Ma kyori.
No, good.
Pangbochase nisum gom jato ora. Parishitase chiksuri mato gom jamato. Teni ti jil parishikama chonga maton deto munduzi. Nani gicho ma jana choni gom jamato. Tendi chason zezi. Chasa te tendi karina hako umari. Te lauri chenpo na tendi chakare zeni chishem. Musu chonga na. Ani kwa chairman te tan sam jan jogo saro chere samare sam tenri chata yo tenri enjoy amado tan ko so so do jan rawo che yin chopan rapi kora che ta khando che ata tenri che ni girin bo rawo che nyama ki pochi tondo nyama norma pani gomchi gyavin da pe lolon ro chen gom ya pon cha so tani ya chi tsik tondo chi les tani ka che gyab jam rawo kali choni me ya ni tani ya po cha so se ta so lam ro chen bo na
So sometimes in practice, you can say, for example, that this has happened. There's a retreat area up above the TCV school up in the mountains over there where there's long-term retreatants. And so one thing that happens is you have somebody who's a very experienced meditator who's been able to meditate for 1 or 2 hours for a long time, is being able to stay very focused. And over time, they only meditate for an hour, then half an hour, then 15 minutes. They have this obstacle arise. And so this isn't actually talked about in the Lamrim Jimmo, but like one thing you can do at that point is go and what with Buddhists, we would say purify and generate merit. So, saying prayers, going out and doing things that are virtuous, and with different purification practice we can do. And so that's an example of something that also can happen, is that you can have that kind of obstacle arise, even if you're an experienced meditator.
Lazo tani namja gidanga gom jamye na tani kalente sona ya lolon rawo che rawa peti jama jani lolon rawo che ki paru paton tes jaya kalimba so che da ya yo sari.
So yeah, just in summary, really meditation is great, but it's really important to do it in a relaxed with a peaceful mind. That's really important, not to push.
Ote ta jani gom bitsena tanda mukpa tsai mukpa nalma Geshe kapi mukpa le Geshe vi tombo nam tome pe zinye se atre ta nam tome pe zinye she sana number toba ta chi pe zinye zeti ta jane thup tsai jil mukpa tel tembu che jimbing on indra mandal samlo tang to yor te langtong la langtong gom ti kabla jamandra samlo tang song sa mukpa zinye imba chi palandra mandra samlo tang to song sa nam tong ta chi pe zinye ba.
So we're back to these objects of meditations that we started, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes ago, with the 4 objects of meditations and the universal objects of meditations. And under that, we have the discursive and non-discursive images. So the non-discursive image is sort of basically what we've been talking about, which is the image where the image is appearing clearly, but you don't have any thoughts about the image. Right. And so what happens is that if you meditate on this, you develop really strong, clear concentration, you achieve what we would call shamatha or shine. Then on top of that, you have the ability to to hold that concentration of that object, but also think about the qualities of that object, to examine that object. And that's what we would call in Tibetan tradition, Hatong, our special insight. So it's on top of this ability to stay fixed non-discursively, then you add the ability without disturbing that concentration to think about that object.
Then Lamtongo Mupal Petani Jacondo, Sanzendo, the Probandic, Patani, the Nilandella Tapatani. Niti nemo the kind of Jungrogra. Then on the same Mupatal Tadi or same Mupatini La Malawi Guni on your Salundra Manjatan. Te Muparoa, same the Taba Patani, Janin, and then I saw it Tabal Tire, in a Jungrogres, Tani, Tani Jambal, Pacheto at the Cachuchimochi.
So there's a sort of an example we can think about in terms of meditation, which is this idea that, once you've achieved shine, it's like you've tied your mind to the object with a rope or a string or something, right? And so if your mind, normally our minds are not tied to the object, so it runs all over the place. But once you have, I keep saying shine, but that's the Tibetan term that I'm used to. Maybe shamatha is more comfortable for everybody, or calm abiding, sorry. I'm more used to the Tibetan. This very, very stable mind, right? This specific achievement of the stable mind. You've tied your mind to this object. And so then once you got your mind tied, then that frees your mind up to do other things without losing the concentration.
That's what Tani Rochitani, Mubun Tazia, to Dembani going in Tachiore, that Kurzo Kuchanichin and come to Objenda watching in a Nachu Nonichina, that Kurzo Pichukangatin all yours, Telipa Chuchia Yo Marese at the Kurzo Quintaz initiative. Tonda Gintazit, Chukanda kind of part, says on saying he had maybe Tombaris, Tombani Keshatel. Tenila, Mubun Tagamubaz, Benita. Kazokum Tat Pena, Kazotan Ramanjay opinion, come to Objenda Siguna, come to Objenda, Mandi Kazuchio Martini Park, Kazuchio Mares, Tatanich.
And so now we're going to move on. We've talked about in the universal objects of meditation, the discursive images and the non-discursive images. So now we're talking about the third of the four, which is the limits of existence, which is not a very helpful translation, but that's what it says. And so what we can talk about in the limits of existence of these objects of meditation, it's meditating, for example, on the two truths. So you have the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. Right, and the conventional truth is the idea that we can look at, for example, all of the different yeah. So we can think about the 18 sense sources. The sense sources.
Yeah, it's a
little hard to explain this as a specific term, but the basic idea is that it's a way of differentiating or dividing all the things that exist. And so it's a systematic way of meditating on everything that exists and understanding that nothing beyond that exists. It's the 18 sense sources, I think, is how we'd have to translate that. And then you have that's the conventional sort of limit, and then you have the ultimate limit, which is then analyzing those things, and whatever you analyze ultimately, when you look for its ultimate existence, you're unable to find it. So those are the two objects of conventional and ultimate limits of existence.
Last what any keeping tanda tiny the shares as well. Tani Gupayon Sundrupi Mupaze, Mupajapa the Terita, Gupayon Sundrupi is visiting also, Nachu Chenye China, Tartica Gubandra the Carres, Nachu Chenye Gupatangaso, Sound Chitangora, Chuchala, Sound Chunimatani, Chuchena Choyomara, Chuche Gua the Carres, Tangasu Dingali Tarichetres, Chuchia the Dingali Tarichetre Mungajamba, Telamui Cheomares, Dingali Tarwala Tarbaze or Tarjamba and Rior. So that the soul Tanda Gupayon Sundrupi. Naso Nanchuche, Gomjamnari, Johnson Gomnari, Nije Gomnari, Tatani Momboche deata, Naso Kangi Tamando, Nikangi Tarichet, the Chedeliores, Sonza Tili Tarsona, or Donda Gupat and Jovarese, or Tarbatejahore. So, the Mandeshi Javjan and Richard.
Oh yeah, so there's the fourth of the four there is achievement of purpose, right? So it's objects that we're meditating on to understand sort of why we're meditating. Right. So the main thing here is that you understand really you're sort of looking at reality, you're looking at samsara, you're analyzing the suffering, and you're really sort of concentrating on this idea that you're meditating to get out of suffering, you're meditating to achieve these things like what we call liberation.
Last, tani tani Japan Jungo Mupazia, the concert all Kanzal Majani, son the Tikablaman Drachi, tani Samban Kipi Mupazia Chindo, Kipu Mupazia, Nachu Kachari, Tangaso Zabulil and Kepache goes a Momboy or Serku Kol and Kepache, Shachi, Danjanso Chazo, Mail and Kepache Goa, Tanji Lob John Chiandra, Mandachi Opinon. Nachu Munichin and Kepache goes out, Lob John Chegos at the carres on the tapena, come job Jeziandro, come Trixandro, Pombo Naziandro, Demba Niziandro, Demba Jet, Tendrialop. But the soul in Kepache, Nachu John in Kepache goes at the Teres, Mato Jamba the Somares, Tesolo Lob John Chini, Tesolo Yoni on the Comchichina, Mato Semlinjo Tangare Mato, Jamba, Cotseri Young. Means what was such a natural Cosupong, which I paint to it and same Joatanto.
So when we talk about objects of meditation for expertise, of course, in the world, there are many types of expertise. We talk about scientists have expertise, doctors have expertise. There's lots of worldly types of expertise. But here, what we're talking about in this context is the Buddhist expertise. So this is really sort of understanding and meditating on things like the five aggregates, the different constituents, sin sources. We can meditate on things like dependent arising, the four truths, the two truths. So we're talking about sort of an expertise in the Buddhist world system, understanding the world. And this is important because even though these other types of expertise, these non-types of Buddhist expertise are able to help us manipulate the external world, they don't help us actually improve our minds. And so this type of meditation, this type of what we would call objects for meditation for expertise, are things that we can meditate on that actually will help us transform our mind.
Also, tani tamat Nyomonam Jungo Mupatrita, Nyomonam Jungo Mupadringaso, Capsites Pamian Raurisha, Nyomonam Jungo Mupatale, Ta, Natso, Tandrigo Mupa Karala Muna Moni, Nyomon, Semji Nyomon Javata, Gangi Mepazoni, Semia Porge, Renjo Resina, Tartina, Natso Semji Javata, Nyomo Mepazoag, Petin Javata, and Ramada Yore, in a Petin. Nekal Sawanin, Nekal Mepazoto, Tamlam Chita, Sawanin Mepazoto, Tamlani, O Mupatini Res, Yomo, the Yomon of John Mupaziat, Nekal control Mazawa, the Teta Mayimba, Ta, Yidrimbo Chigla, Yomo Makiwa Zoata, Sawanin Yomo Makiwa Zoa, Tamlam Teni, Sawanin Mepazot, Deja going Yamne.
So when we talk about objects of meditation, so the fourth one here. So Dingatsuki Jupaki Jungyangi Mipati shaking me.
Nyomona Tawol Makanzal Janishigora.
So the objects, so now we're talking about objects of meditation for purifying afflictions. And so we have lots of different afflictions, and we can break this down into two different types of objects. There's objects that we can meditate on that will sort of temporarily act as an antidote to these types of afflictions, you know, for example, like patience and anger or love and ill will. Then there's objects, for example, that we can meditate on that will actually truly cut the root of afflictions, right? So you can think about the way of dividing objects of meditation for purifying afflictions in these two different ways, things that temporarily help us and things that are actually solving the problem at its root.
Tatani on the Makashi Tata Yon Machiri some roach injury that I can't not you with any or turning Yomosavani Mepazo, the Tavla Deja touching what
So if we really want to get rid of the root, if we really want to get rid of samsara, get rid of these afflictions from the root to totally get rid of them, then what we need to understand and meditate on are the four truths.
Also, Deja Zat, country lego resity, Tomata, Deja and Digner Demba, Zidiat, not so not get Digner Demba, Jani Lekache. Digner Dembas in a Karlab de Oresity, not so Mando Yangoni, the Carre is in ones and Tachiatri. Mandoata not so Digner Terwanam, you know, not so Namji Digner Zeata, the Nachu Nani Shepi Digner to Tani Tet Mandavash. Kundrawa karreziti nachu nang dingar de la sum shewari ngaso na gi dingar zeyati tinang chi cha de ore dingar ki dingar zeyati cha de ore dingar so nyima tawpa le kali gyab le ka che lob jon che thama che de ya ta peshan ro so an senyen ro so ta so che teso yang tar tik so na kange ta mando ni kibo chi yong wi che de so sa dingar ngon chen che ya ke che mo re ni thoma dingar she bare
So the first of the Four Noble Truths we call the truth of suffering, right? And so what is this truth of suffering? The truth of suffering is, it's really our sort of normal experience and what we really need to understand, right? So it's the first thing we need to understand is this suffering? And so when we say suffering in our normal way of speaking, and what we mean by suffering in Buddhism are slightly different, because in Buddhism, we can talk about suffering as the three types of suffering. There's the suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and the sort of suffering of pervasive conditioning. And so what we normally talk about as suffering really in Buddhism is just the first type of suffering. And so, what we spend most of our time and energy working and in sort of trying to do and trying to avoid, is contained within this truth of suffering. And this truth of suffering sort of describes the way that our lives go.
That's tani dingar ni batal njuri dingar ze ore tan njuri dingar ze ate kyoso take che ta ngoni re ore pe na njuri dingar ze at khatu ko deche treni dechen ro chi re pe na khala jumbo ro chi na nga so ga so ga sa khala ta za ra na jumbo yore ke boyo tirizan sani za nani zati te kangi ko ani modern ro zi pon kamban ro ya po chi yona tambo ko ta tani ro na ke boyo ren kamba ti nan de na ke boyo atri de sani de jedem parshi tani mur kamba te le ga pon ani sacha te ta chi par sama dekhe ta sama tembo de ro che mundu dekhe sama gen ro go sonsa danger la dingar ke tani kyal.
So of the three types of suffering, right? So we have the suffering of change, and the suffering of pervasive conditioning, right? So now the second type of suffering, the suffering of change, is what we actually normally think about as pleasure. Actually, in Buddhism, is a suffering. And why do we call it a suffering? Because if you think about the things that we enjoy, like, for example, food, right? If you have a very tasty food, your favorite food, right? If somebody makes you eat it for every meal, it won't take that long for you to hate that food. And you can say this about anything, like a new car, a house, any of the things that we think of as pleasure, right? They're not stable, and they over time will actually change into suffering. And so this is why in Buddhism, the second type of suffering is the suffering of change, because what we take as pleasure actually becomes suffering.
Oh, sambatal chapan devche ki dingar zegre tan tin namje ngatson do de ngoni go raw me pa ngomni de tingo shawr ngatson namje ngatsol rawa mendu ngatsol rawa go ching de oti mi jamba ching ngatsol wangir cheni rawa me pa zo tel ngonzen chego nanchu nani rawa me pa ze soso go sem de nyomong bi wand soni rawa me pa tel ngonzen ra sem ji wand sa sem nyomong go wand zo nyomong go dingar zo de yore ze ne o tel ab de ore so sa ngatsol Roa min ko al ni ke se na rawa yo mar rawa men ke zonket mi jamba mar so some nyom patres.
So the third of the three, suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and suffering of pervasive conditioning, which I know is sort of a mouthful, but what one way to explain what that means is this idea that we're not free, right? So normally we think of if we don't have freedom, if we don't have independence, right? We think, oh, it's someone else taking it from us, like someone else is making us do stuff. But in the Buddhist teachings, really what keeps us from being free, what controls us actually is our afflictions, right? It's all of these afflictions that are controlling us and keeping us from being free. And so that's one way to understand the third type of suffering is the lack of freedom that is caused by our afflictions.
So taz samlo chitani penj so go sem the tembo chini sem kipo ngol gi chotsawa ni jamato ni detwa chi chona tani ngatsol dingar yonji yo sa are tambo te yo ayo sare chi samlo sem the deke ngol shak ta chi gomjani deni telin jawa choni ndwa me chi semba zoto sona ani ngatsol dingar yo sare.
So do you think if you sat there and just sort of sat there and tried to be happy, do you think, this is a question, do you think you guys would be able to do that? Would you be happy, or would you have problems?
Sonsa ko sef dekhe ke gol det sona dingar yon sa yo mari sonsa sef dekhe ke gol det wata tingol ba so che de
Simdeki
sem deke ge gani dingar nal choni malhoni deke tanga so sangye ze ada so sem deke ge ngal de sare ta dingar ze at kol yo mare so tingol ze che e yo me ta tanga so tak che re ma to ya ne che yo
so if you sort of really thought about this and examined, if you're able to just stay and be happy regardless of what's happening, over time, and that's great. That's really sort of the goal. That's one of the things the Buddha can do. But really, I think most of us, sooner or later, problems are going to arise.
Not so little pochi quachi lupena long tapon so long tapon the chin. Tanga long and jicamares and so yonder jechina long tapo the match only tet and royat and that's so yam you go over. Sembal tet on our sembal and give and damage tire and that's so yam you go over. Something also same lo the deke go and give out on it. Dinner the choni tingle pancor machiwa tablan chichet of sona. Deke dambachi you want. The car is in a same lingeran. You at the Tehakon, launch him watching Bassochet in a launch on
So we can also think of the example, like if someone or you in your life, whatever you've worked on, like for example, if you have a lot of anger and you've worked on that anger over time and you've seen how your anger has decreased and decreased and decreased and decreased. And so you've been able to change your mind, right? And develop less anger. In that same way, right? So you can see that if we want happiness, we want suffering. If we want happiness and we don't want suffering, then, we can work on this method to increase our happiness and reduce our suffering. And over time, we'll be able to do that because we can change your mind.
Ko pu tombo kewi kabel tramze timken chige ko jarbo chana jarbo hachan zurje chimbo chakandus chu chena ko sanje top sares ni lonte te javres ne ko jarbo palati ko chu chen chungdo mere ze jarbo che chungdo yoni ta kol pa sayan tonya chekin ta jarbo ro kar gogo chichteni pas jamba ta mandra wa kepo shuchi cheni jare ze.
So when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, the teacher who taught the Four Noble Truths is, of course, the Buddha. And the Buddha was a prince in India. And he was born as a prince in India. And he had everything he wanted, right? He had the best food, clothes, housing. He was very wealthy, in a very wealthy family. And his father, the king, did not want him to become, what would you say? Because kids say become a Buddhist, become a practitioner at that time. He did not want him to become a spiritual practitioner because he wanted him to become the king, right? But so the Buddha was a prince and had kind of everything he wanted, every pleasure.
Patsen Rui Kavle, mi Mombochi Shen Royo Pakenton Yorela, mi Mombochi Nadego Bahakore, mi Mombochi Gengo Chandra Hakore. Taki Samlotani, Nayan Tendi Chakareve, Saina Tendi Chakareve, Sani Samlotandi, that's how much the Tendi Chavani, but Chikan by the Tomate Hakoti, did Tanda Demba Tomboke, Dinner on the Cheton, Teniche or Mato, Zan Marani, Kanging on the Cheomari.
So then we ask, we look at why did the Buddha start thinking about the Dharma, really, or why did he start thinking about sort of, how would you translate that in that context? Why did he start thinking about sort of spiritual things? Why did he set out on this path? And, well, what happened is that the Buddha went out from his house and he saw sick people, he saw old people, he saw death, and he started thinking, oh, this is going to happen to me, right? Oh, and this is actually going to happen to everyone. So even though the Buddha had every worldly pleasure he saw the condition that we all lived in, and that impelled him to really take on this other way of thinking, to think about, I hate translating spiritual, but I can't think of a better translation, this sort of spiritual path.
That's what that Tisamlota, Nangama Jarbota Soleamonga, Mishiata, Nagingo Macha, Kariche go Sambata. Can you get in Menzo and Ramanda Cheris? That is some good Jichimbo Kashigo. Mashiata Manawa Gengo Machawa Tanjig Membombozoni Tate, Shuicheri Yosari. That's what Samago Karche or in a Chaloning Yoatanga Tashiti, Zoto Taritaco, Zoto Yomari. That's Sanjega, Telly Doni, Naloni, how she chia sablo tan kor yore
so the kungi the chilo kiting and not so namjin the chilo
magya mezo ata mishya mezo ala sablo tan yo mar
So normally when we think about combating things like aging, sickness, and death, what we think about is our external things that we can do. We can take medicine, we can sort of work with the external world, fix things like that, go see a doctor, all of those things, vitamins, whatever. But the Buddha really, when he was looking for a cure essentially for this problem, and he didn't look outside or he didn't find the cure outside. He found the cure in changing his own mind.
sonsa tate jagar kapte digla chubake rasmo mombo yo sare tso nan ro ni quality tabla ton ro cheze ti cho tap kar go ze ti kol zumtren ro ngoshin ro tan dig ja tap ton go na ko sol ton ya yo mang sha me pa gengo cha me pa na me pa tan zo ko sol shoot sha me lam do
So of course, at this time in India, there were many incredible practitioners, many very learned yogis and scholars. And the Buddha looked around, and many of them had what we would call cities, or like these magical powers, or these abilities to sort of clairvoyances and things, but that developed from concentration. But none of these people were able to actually stop birth, aging, sickness, and death.
Tani koro ga samlo ta yon di ngatsu kangi te kawani yongundu koro samlo ta di kangi chama pate sona susundo pa chewa kontro chewa ngarjar chewa chato chewa soso ga samlo nda mandra ta de ni dingar yon sa tsawa ngoni te tendi jen samni tendi tsawa pate sona soso te tsawa chewa nga zini nyen ta pa soso te mar tendi ga samlo dikya ta choga kangi chama te zogundu sambi gim kange ke jiken de ke tel konte tel demba ni pa kanjong demba la
so then the Buddha in this context was like, really, what is the cause of all of our suffering? Well, what Buddha saw was that we have anger, jealousy, we have craving, attachment, and these are the things that are causing us suffering. These are the things that are causing us problems. And where do these come from? These come from this afflictive self-grasping. It's like this over-reified view of the self, this over-solid view of the self, right? This is where that's coming from. So these afflictions are coming from that, and then we have this afflictive, over-solid view of the self. That's that root cause, right? And sorry, I almost forgot what I was going to say. And then this is the second noble truth, right? So we've got the truth of suffering, which is the recognition of fundamentally birth, aging, sickness, and death. And so now we have the second, not noble truth, we have the second truth, which we would say is the truth of the origin of suffering.
Sonza ta kange me pa zoala ndi lo dikyata so me pa zo ko ndus lo dikyata so me pa zoya yona kange me pa zo andu lo dikyata so kange zo amen kange me pa zo amandus ta lo dikyata so jawa tan du amandus samni samlo tan ni ta lo jawa tan yo pa ta sambanye pare lo jawa tan ni lo dikyata sama me pa zo sonso ni lo dekye ngal ni ware ni dekye ta tarbato ware sani gode sambashe ware.
And so then we have the third truth is the truth of the cessation. And so the Buddha then thinks, okay, well, if this is the cause, right, if this is the cause of suffering, can we get rid of it, right? So we have, as long as we have these negative states of mind, we have suffering. If we don't have these negative states of mind, then we don't have suffering, right? So the third truth, this truth is the cessation, is the state of the mind where you have fully eradicated, you've achieved what we call liberation, where you've totally gotten rid of all of these negative states of mind, and so you have a mind that's at peace.
Tani ta demba sama gopi demba terere tani ta demba jepa ta lon jewa ta yo pa lon jewa ta na deki yo pa te ha ko son tan jewa kan ti tango re zin jewa ta ngo ma ta tsawi chani tomba ni gong dus tomba ni to gom na danza shiri chong ton tsawa ni me pa zon dus ta te roba lo zo pa gom ya nda wo ta ni je gom ya chang chup ka sem go ta te so re shas nam ja gendal te so gom to na pa sho ko lo dik cha ta so ni pa chong tar tik na lo dik cha to peti sem lo ma yo ma chi sha dus peti tani tarbata tamsha ke bi kom to wari tani zoni she go mari na go mari sa go mari tani sombare.
So the fourth noble truth, we have the truth of suffering, truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and now we have the truth of the path of suffering. So the Buddha has said, oh, well, if we can get rid of these afflictions, we have this, this mind, we've achieved liberation, but then how do we get there? How do we actually do this? And so the method that the Buddha taught is that by meditating primarily the meditation on emptiness, this meditation on this lack of this imagined way of existing, this impossible imagined way of existing of the self, we decrease this afflictive self-grasping, that decreases our afflictions. And then so slowly over time you meditate on that, and then you remove the cause for the afflictions. You also can meditate on the so chiefly it's this idea of meditating on emptiness, but you also can meditate on things like compassion, love, patience, all these other things, and these will help your meditation on emptiness. But it's really chiefly this meditation on emptiness that allows us to achieve liberation, and then ultimately this omniscient mind, this Buddhahood that we talk about. So one thing I meant to say at the end of the last translation interpretation is that, of course, when you realize this path and the truth of suffering, you stop birth, aging, sickness, and death. So there's one thing that's difficult to understand, that's very difficult for me to understand, right, is this idea that through this path we stop birth, aging, sickness, and death, and that was the goal of the Buddha. But the historical Buddha actually manifested aging and death, right? And so that is something that is difficult to understand sometimes.
Sanji gomba zoyo mares, jinjan la chandro atindi res, tindi jinjan la chandro atiso ngatsul tonsar la zumchen rawo tini ko chongwi namjan rawo shik tini pem song re mato, ngatso sanji ngoni gomba zoyo mares, and nanchu tsawi sonsar tere. Yina tate.
So the one answer from within the tradition, the doctrinal answer, is this idea that the Buddha didn't really actually die, that the Buddha was creating the appearance of that for our benefit. He was sort of emanating this idea of aging and death for us, but that he didn't actually, experience aging and death from his own side.
So sound zopa gomian mandu, anin dopa chori tamandu, chato machewa, ajala no sem machewa. Tandi chena soso semle deki yonwatan, soso mateke po yonwatan. That thing it touch on is to energy.
The answer they come give.
No, Tangatson Namja gender control Shitacheman, dopa chonchi goya mama. Ani, they chet of sona. Then he semble deki yon Sanjay Sona
So, but one thing that you can really test for yourselves and decide for yourselves and really see is this idea that there's no sort of questions about, right? Is if you can meditate on things like patience and decrease your anger, if you can meditate on love and compassion, these things will change your mind, and they will increase the happiness and the peace in your life, right? And that's something that the Buddha has taught. That's the heart of his teachings, that you can really trust, you can really believe in, you can see for yourself and test.
So
even if we don't think about past and future lives, really, if you're able to use these teachings to practice in this life and improve your mind and have a healthy mind and sort of a happy, peaceful mind, and this is a wonderful benefit. So for example, if you see someone that has a lot of wealth or something, whatever that you want, and you get very jealous of them, really, that's a really stupid attitude at the end of the day, if you think about it, right? Because you're not hurting them, you're actually just causing yourself pain, and you're not getting any richer by doing it, right? So it's really a dumb, non-skillful, like a dumb way to sort of think.
He young non trick young social can it. Tanda young, she do young yondin down, Panjo social can it. She do young young social can it. They live by sound and it's about Luce did it, a correlion de yona, Corod Leka di Chachin and Corocher, did this on. Keep shatre.
So also, for example, anger, right? We usually get angry when someone does something wrong or makes a mistake, right? Well, someone does something wrong and makes a mistake. What is the use of getting angry? You're just hurting yourself in the same way that like when we get jealous when someone's wealthy, right? So you see someone that's rich and you get angry, your mind gets upset. You see someone that makes a mistake, and people are making mistakes all the time, right? And then your mind gets upset. And so this is stupid, right? This is a dumb way to go about life, right? So what we should do is just relax and have, don't do that. Have a peaceful and calm mind.
Also, the new Zopa Gombi Cableta, Mijang Soso Lil Dignacheona, Zopa Gom Cashipura, Golashirion, Tavion Tenicina, they can't merit the Mayan bag. She could get Yagunduzian, Chignal Kesha, the Chashi and Duzia, Tile Kacha, and Nana and Roman. That's a control on it.
So
So
when we talk about, for example, practicing patience, I mean, the extreme case here, we talk about someone that's like beating you or hitting you or cutting off your arm, right? And practicing patience for that. And yes, we talk about that. But the important thing, not the important thing to say, but beyond that, we also can talk about things in our daily life, right? There's, of course, in India, there's lots of noise, there's lots of barking dogs, there's lots of reasons that we can constantly be getting upset, right? And these are perfect times just to be practicing patience.
Lasso, that need to see Tito Zone in Josoni, Choso Namjinla, so the Soso Semba Chipoche go at the kitchen Borisha. This also only Jujutana Cheto and Nassol Nipatiore. Gomo Mambozo Gores in a cowboy in us. Soso Semba to Soso Dapo Japtona, it's also Nibai.
Okay, so their time is up, so we're going to stop. And my hope really is that you can use these lessons to sort of improve and change your mind. And, for example, it would be great if we all could make a lot of money, but that's not something we always can control. But one thing you are able to do and are able to control is your own mind. You are able to take charge, to take ownership of your own mind and control it and change it. And so my hope is you're able to do that and have a happy, healthy mind.
Last, Tani Toanda Yona Matajichmundo.
Anybody have any questions? No, come on, somebody. Please.
Talking about female shamatha practice,
You
said that it's not sense consciousness, it's only mental consciousness. So when we're doing, use the example of sound being an enemy of meditation, but when we're doing, say, using breath as an object, this is mental consciousness engaging with sense consciousness.
Sure.
So
I asked him this question. I asked him this question today. Yeah.
we don't
get the kindness and the
ngoni renga so ndri u chembo tani shi shashare de na am chokya ja ko chir li ge chorwa ge nyon de jira na janga so le kan ro che di ka nga so bu ta ge chwa te nyong mo ndo te na je sem korong ge tni bu ndo ge yore sambi ge sem korong ge sawlo ta mong li ge chwa le shita chi to ma chewa te se chem
sem korong gi sem tang
li ge chorwa te ka ka che to che Take Chegore Mato, League Torangol, short song, take Gomia Bochaka.
Sim kind of go about it.
The same with the Yan Drogorema, Legore, Yan Drogoremado, Naso Drangacha Dran. The same go sound on it, and Rodeo Samba Mato, Puki Musa, she took a janda with a Tangila Salomata.
So, when we're meditating on breath, you want the body sensation. Like normally when we're breathing, we don't notice our breathing, right? So you actually want eventually the physical sensation of the air coming in and out. You do want that actually to go away. And what you want to work on focusing on is the mental consciousness of being aware of it coming and going, right? So you can count, you have these other things, but you do eventually need to move away. I do this exact same thing. I like to meditate on that thing right here, right? It's a sensation, but the teaching is that actually no, that's not going to produce a good result. That you need to be focusing on the mental awareness of breathing and not the physical sensation of breathing.
Petra ya pochitesha Hinduish ngamachita
Yes, yes, exactly.
you know ngel tindri choso the trawa chong the ngoni re samsung winjong the chen the litor kongol shora ninga chemondu samsung ina ta jong non the litor kongol masho ta shi kan che korzen tangan thoma sonda tate so so gomba so chiare mo gomjawa yishi gomja gwa te sabo sa chang re wanshi limba so che kan che yo
So definitely the texts are very clear on this, that you have to focus on a mental consciousness, not a sense consciousness. But of course, you know, you have to practice. There are, I think,
musi ngema choso trawa te tima but nge pi ko le saulo che tamanyo
so before I had asked this question and you asked it again, he really hadn't considered this question that much. But yeah, the texts are very clear that if you are not focusing on a mental consciousness, the concentration will not come out very well.
That's good. Say,
yeah, he was first.
I know the teaching, and I know practicing with Francois actually. So he said to do it with the breath, but in one point to reach the 9 stage of samatha, you must to move to visualize. But if I visualize the breath in the channels, so this is imagination. It's no touch on the breathing of the regular. So but it's moving. So this is a little bit tricky.
Sure.
Can it be used for
shamatha? So the kungi di gegen shimba di sumba karisen na so tangbo di upnuki ki tsoro nangshin di mikire te jela di jiksinga netse sumba shiba de la di yish di
yishingol pajok
di parkir and ini kungi tiwa karisen di kungi di up di nangshin di self-dap drabiyores di yongiyore drogiyore ini di yishe drabo di self-dap chegiyores ini di self-dap di gugyo chegiyores dinjin di tela dene di shine tukiyores kangisana di tata di mikpa te di gugyo chegiyores
ngale ta mukban ro de yo ya tisere te parche jane top to sare tanda ke girze ya tangoni tanda mukpa chike no na giru mukpa nga so zok na le ten tonam ta pal lam la pa giru ale chi shendu ka chi chena wash ni shi giru te ya yana mish tanda jane to parche top to sare samutu jane ze de ga mukpa ta tanga so ran so so ndra manda jara mukpa chunju ja tan ji yorita ko mukpa ni chen re saro ni chen ze na tagana mukpa chig ma to ko mukpa mombo sia yo ma mukpa ngi chen la mukpa ngi chen chig le ni takpa tel salo tan de ti jane to
yeah, so I think, I mean, he agreed that it's fine, you know, to start with something more physical and then at some point move to the mental consciousness. He says he think that's fine. He said sorry, I should be doing this in first person. I think that it's true that you can achieve shamatha on something that's moving. That's really not necessarily a problem. We usually talk about smaller objects of meditation being better. But the main thing that's taught about in the text is that you have to stay with one object of meditation. So whatever you pick, you then have to stick with that and don't change around. That's the main.
Penanga so hand chi gom bikable al mungrawo tan ta ti chasan chi gom gro chi mombo ni chi yoro ta mu pa chi shak
yeah, so for example, if we meditate on what we call a deity in Tibetan, that these meditational yidams, right? You just one, you don't pick different ones every day. You want to pick one deity, I'm sorry, I'm hesitant to say deity because if people are not very Buddhist, that word might sound strange. So the meditational yidam or objects. I don't know what to say. The deity is so confusing, I think, in the beginning because it's not a deity in the Christian sense. But anyway, a meditation object. The idea is that you just need to pick one and stick with it. Yeah.
You mentioned the different types of meditation and that the majority of what we practice is discursive. Can you maybe talk about the other types and if we're able to practice those?
The majority of what we talk is discursive.
You said that discursive is what we think of as meditation.
Well, I think if I said that, well, I think what I meant is that when we talk about the analytical meditation, that's mostly what we talk about in the Tibetan tradition. at least at this stage. But sorry, so your clarification is
You said there's like 4 types of meditation and
2 types for sure.
said discourse. So 4.
Oh, okay. So there's 4 objects. There's 4 objects of meditation. There's the discursive, non-discursive, the limits of awareness, or whatever that weird translation is. I think it's limits. Yeah. So what is your? So what? Sorry.
Maybe if you could touch upon those and if you're able to practice them, or if they're something for a more advanced practitioner.
Okay. So the disruption chain, the younger the called the non the also the mikbashi the kept the younger the not the gum get the not the big paper younger also the tango the ancient
the third was Hamarin, the Kirtani, Kichani, Nanshu and Rotanchi Mato, not so Mupa Jevi Kasatanda, Mupatas Yandel Jagore Mata, Jane. Tanjira Mari, Nanshu Drums into Chiri.
now the Nanto Jebeki but they
Tell Hanto Tomas on Partana, so Tatanda Gomjaval Jena Yungumarwa. Landon to Tijanium, Nantota Chibi, Tombo, Nato may be the Jogore.
So if we look at the first 2, for example, I lost my little thing. If we look at the first 2, the objects of meditation, where you have the non-discursive image meditation, right? That's our basic, everyone starts with that, right? You're just visualizing something and holding it still. On the basis of that, you achieve this really high state, this very called shamatha or shine, right? And so when we talk about discursive, the what do we call it? The discursive image meditation. So this is a very difficult thing to do, right? So this is what we would call special insight, which you have to have on top of this very, very stable meditation. So that's definitely not, the second part is definitely not a beginner level, but the first part is just the basic holding an image and meditating on that. The other 2 were, what was it? It was, so there was the objects of meditation, universal objects of meditation for purifying your behavior, objects of meditation for expertise, objects of meditation for purifying affliction.
Mupa Corolla, Signana Chibi, not auto Chibi, and Tome Pezinia, Mupunta, Gubai also.
You know, Kepeki Mikpat hang the Jibeki Jomaki
Geshe Tandajini, they keeping Mupazina so not some Kepache goes at the Shegore, they Gomja Musichimari. Kobanam Yom Panyom, so
yeah, so the rest of them in general, yes, you can apply them to increase your understanding or to do different things, but you can meditate them now if you want. You understand that.
Choso Chilayonzo na pen and to Chetan Tisozosoni and Rayon and something church and
so the time is up. If anyone wants to leave, there's no problem. Go ahead and go. We can keep doing some questions here for a few minutes.
So if I understand true, actually, we cannot practice analytic meditation before we reach the 9th level of shamatha.
No, you can't practice this discursive image meditation, because that meditation is talking about hatong, which is hatong on top of shine. So I'm sorry, special insight. So that's a very specific type of analytical meditation. Yeah.
But so the other meditation actually I can practice
analytical meditation
without the reaching shamatha.
Yeah, Jegom katu yena dinga so the
Kegum Zeat Journey Mandra Koni Chocolate and Pena Zopa Gomander, Niji Goat, so some Kegum Jakayosh.
Yeah. So what I would call Jegom or analytical meditation, we can like meditating on compassion, any kind of meditating with reason doesn't require shamatha. That's our normal.
Question: it's not will be actually contemplation. Doesn't I need the mind that can hold the object for analyze meditation, which will be the shamatha? Because where is the free wisdom? So actually, what we do now for analytic meditation is actually contemplation, because we don't have this tool to keep the subject.
Yeah, so the shine mato bengun the mini chaining aso jegom tukio mara.
Gomia. Tete Cherio, not so Niji and Rawotan, so Gombicabla, 다 센션을 강에 맞춰는 삼니년 타파텔 센션을 너 지금에 삼니년 타파 삼로 단데 계공원이래 나 랑도 차요 말.
So the distinction, the way that we're making it here is that yes, that we can do analytical meditation right now. Any kind of maybe what you're calling contemplation, like focused, repeated thinking on something, would be analytical meditation. What we can't do, we would call special insight, Platong. That's the very special mind that's on top of this concentration.
그 계공도 개천벌이 조바곰비세 컨트롤 온이 그 지킨치레온 다 컨트롤자는 펜도 말이 콜라노그리 날노그리 산니 티사노 양양도 단이 컨트롤 마차들 계공세게 요를 계양 첨부시고.
Yeah, and so this is really important, right? Just for example, if you think about anger, you think, oh, anger hurts me, it hurts other people. You go through this kind of thinking process. That's analytical meditation, at least the way that we're describing it. And yeah, and it's very important, and we can do it now.
Last, honey.
Anybody online? Is there anything online? There's literally that. Thanks a lot.
Mendo.
I have a question.
Hey.
Oh. Yeah, sure, great.
Last of Hakos. Rangrig the killing going. Then the
No. You want to say your question in English real quick?
So my question was that sometimes in meditation, for example, so they say that your mind need to observe your own mind, so that you need to make sometimes the distance from your mind or from your feelings and so forth. But then if you assert such thing, doesn't it have like the consequence that you need to assert the
Self-knower.
or like a self-cognizer, the mind can actually look at its own self, so like whether it doesn't have like this kind of extreme consequence. So this was my
also non-junal Rangrig Zidea killing it, the Trumta Kashi Chonwari Tatanga, so Tunda Yasho Uma Tanjo at Seguri, the so Rangrig Kimmelin somebody tag. Rangrig same Litsoala Mupa, similar Mupatani, the Nalo Salotand in the Rangrig Maravis and the Rangrig Mares Egindua. Rangrig Zideate, Chalolopa Samlo Chunitamutoku, same Kanja Salotand, the Rig Samlo you are raising. Not so Chaloko Chalata so Karagashigri, same Gishigres, same she, same the Sishigri, same Shinki Javlo Rangrig Yores, he same Mato Jamba Chalolo Salo Tangamares, and Rangrig the Tindiji Jakandua, Oma Tanjo Chirina, Tanjilang Maris, same Korokoro Shigri, Pai Shigri, Tili Javlo Yashing around Go Mares, and Tindila, sounds around killing Bicho Melana.
Did you want to translate? Yeah, let me translate. You want me to do it? Were you not paying? Yeah.
Just
try.
Get his cat.
there are like different philosophical schools in the Buddhism, and the kind of the best then is what's called in the consequentialist, the Madhyamika Prasangika, and some of the schools are asserting what is called like self-cognizer, and the Madhyamika Prasangika asserts that there is no self-cognizer. So what is the meaning of self-cognizer? Self-cognizer is kind of a mind which is kind of an inner mind which only kind of looks at its own. But what the Madhyamika Prasangika are saying, that there is no such thing as a self-cognizer, and the mind is like cognizing out external objects. But
That's his name, though.
Yeah. The Tibetan word for the self-cognizer is Rangrig, which is Geshe.
Basically, so then the final answer was that no, there is no any kind of extreme consequence. You just said that the mind of this kind of meditation, you need to assert the self-cognizer.
Last, I
Anybody else? You got one more question?
아니 저 질라요니오는 배셔양 주 다시 아니라 그잠바 저지 근데 나서면 되니 진짜도 고잡셔 자잖아.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop there. Thank you everybody for coming.
그치?
Yeah.
요
그래.
안돼 자자가.
So, you can also the